The year was 2046, but it didn't feel like the future people once dreamed of. The world was louder, faster, and angrier. Nations no longer argued about ideas. They competed for the air they breathed and the water they drank. Every corner of the planet carried tension, and everyone could sense it. People woke up to the sound of news alarms and breaking headlines. Reports of cyber attacks, border disputes, and mysterious explosions filled every screen. The word peace had almost disappeared from everyday speech. Factories worked through the night to build machines of protection, while families locked their doors and whispered about rumors of war. No one really knew who would start it, but everyone knew it was coming. In the big cities, people rushed through their routines pretending everything was fine. Children still went to school, workers still took the trains, and leaders still gave polite speeches about international cooperation. But under that polite surface, the world was cracking. Energy shortages had started small, with one region blocking trade routes and another cutting off fuel supplies. Soon every country began hoarding what little it had left. Even the most developed nations faced blackouts and rationing. At night, entire neighborhoods went dark. The silence was heavy. People could almost feel the planet holding its breath. Across the ocean, satellites blinked out one by one. Some officials said it was just technical failure. Others knew better. The truth was that hidden digital battles were already happening in orbit, invisible to the public. Hackers, private contractors, and silent military programs fought for control of the sky. Ordinary people only noticed when their navigation stopped working, or when communication networks flickered. A flight would suddenly lose contact for a few minutes, or a ship would drift off course. No one wanted to admit it, but the world was losing control of its own technology. The media called it the Quiet War. It wasn't fought with tanks or missiles. It was fought with code, signals, and information. Each country accused the other of interference. Leaders shook hands in front of cameras, but behind closed doors, they prepared for the next blow. In a small room inside the United Nations headquarters, the air was thick with stress. Delegates from every major nation sat around a long table. They were supposed to discuss a peace treaty for cyber warfare, but no one trusted anyone else enough to sign it. One of the senior advisors finally spoke, his voice calm but tired. "If this continues," he said, "we won't need a world war. We'll destroy ourselves with confusion." No one disagreed, yet no one acted. Meetings ended the same way every time, with polite words, fake smiles, and no solution. The world had become addicted to pretending everything was under control. Meanwhile, in ordinary neighborhoods, people noticed the change in the air. Food prices climbed every week. Families cut back on meals to make savings last. Farmers saw strange weather ruin their crops. Too much rain one season, not enough the next. Fishermen found plastic and metal instead of fish. A teacher in a small coastal town kept telling her students, "Remember this time. History will call it the age when we forgot how to listen." The children didn't fully understand, but they felt her sadness. One evening, a bright flash appeared in the night sky. It looked like a falling star at first, but it wasn't. News reports said an unidentified object had struck a satellite orbiting over the Pacific Ocean. Within hours, different governments blamed each other. Some claimed it was an accident, others called it an act of aggression. The world held its breath again. People went to bed wondering if the morning would bring war. Journalists worked through the night collecting statements, but every statement was filled with denial and anger. The next day, stock markets crashed. Cargo shipments stopped. Travel restrictions tightened. Fear spread faster than facts. Behind the scenes, a quiet group of scientists and former intelligence experts met in Geneva. They had been monitoring strange orbital activity for years. They weren't sure who was responsible for the attacks, but they knew this pattern had been repeating. Slowly, and now it was reaching its peak. They shared their findings with a few world representatives, warning them that the planet was on the edge of a mistake too big to undo. One of them said quietly, "We've run out of time to be polite." The phrase stayed in people's minds. It described perfectly what everyone felt but couldn't say. Humanity had been polite for too long, hiding behind diplomacy, letting fear control action, pretending to cooperate while secretly competing. As days passed, more accidents occurred in orbit. Small satellites collided or vanished from radar. Communication lines failed at random moments. The public didn't know how much worse it was behind the scenes. Inside military control centers, warning lights flashed. Operators whispered about targeting errors and unknown signals. Some of them couldn't sleep, haunted by the thought that the next mistake could be the last one. Meanwhile, the world's leaders held another emergency summit. Cameras showed their handshakes, but their eyes gave away the truth: distrust, exhaustion, and quiet panic. A young journalist watching the broadcast wrote in her notebook, "Everyone is smiling, but it feels like a funeral for peace." She was right. Ordinary people began to protest. In the streets of capital cities, thousands marched not for one country but for the planet itself. They carried signs saying, "Stop the madness and we share the same earth." It was the first time in decades that citizens of different nations spoke the same message. Still, their voices were drowned out by noise, the endless debate of politics, fear, and power. The tension didn't explode all at once. It built slowly, like pressure in the earth before a quake. On social media, rumors spread about new weapons being tested. Some said they were defense systems. Others believed they were designed for something far worse. Each rumor sparked another round of panic buying, another protest, another sleepless night. People began to realize that no government could fully control what was happening anymore. Technology had grown faster than human wisdom, and now the machines and networks that connected everyone were turning into the same tools that divided them. Even in homes, families stopped talking about dreams or plans. Conversations were filled with questions no one could answer. What happens if it all goes dark? Where will we go? Can anyone stop this? And yet in small acts, humanity still showed its heart. Neighbors shared food when shops ran empty. Teachers organized free classes to keep children hopeful. Musicians played on street corners to remind people that beauty still existed. Through all the fear, people began to understand something deeper, that survival wasn't about nations or armies anymore. It was about unity, about remembering that everyone was part of the same fragile world. In the final weeks of that year, the situation reached its breaking point. A new satellite was launched to restore communications, but within hours it was destroyed, again by an unidentified force. This time, there was no denying it. The world's patience snapped. An emergency broadcast flashed on every screen, every radio, every phone. It wasn't a threat, not yet. It was a plea, an unspoken message that said, "Enough." The world was tired of living in fear. Inside homes, people stopped whatever they were doing and looked up at their screens. They didn't know who would speak next or what would happen tomorrow. But one thing was clear: the old rules no longer worked. For the first time, humanity began to consider speaking as one voice, not as separate nations, not as divided rivals, but as Earth itself. The air felt heavier that night. Streets were quiet, skies darker than usual, but somewhere, beneath all the fear, there was also a strange spark of hope. Maybe it was the realization that even at its most divided, the planet still shared the same heartbeat. No one knew what would happen next. The governments were preparing statements, military units were on alert, and communication experts were decoding signals. But among ordinary people, something more powerful was spreading. The sense that this time, the world might finally stand together, and somewhere, in a quiet control room overlooking the ocean, a voice whispered what millions were thinking but no one dared to say aloud. This can't go on. The next warning won't be polite. The world didn't sleep that night. After the satellite was destroyed, every government held emergency meetings. Journalists stood outside official buildings waiting for answers that never came. The internet buzzed with fear, and even people who usually avoided the news couldn't stop checking their phones. For most, it felt like living in a countdown. Something was coming and nobody knew what. In homes across the planet, families stayed glued to their television screens. Every channel showed the same image: empty skies, quiet oceans, and flashing headlines about unidentified interference. In one city, a group of engineers gathered inside a control center. They stared at a wall of monitors that once displayed active satellites orbiting the Earth. Now half the screens were black. Some blinked with static, others showed warning codes. The engineers tried to restart systems, but every attempt failed. Someone finally muttered, "It's not just malfunction. It's deliberate," no one argued. They all knew. A message went out to the world's defense councils. Communication lines were breaking down faster than they could be repaired. That meant global surveillance was weakening. It was like going blind, one eye at a time. Within hours, markets crashed again. Cargo ships froze in mid-route because navigation was unreliable. Air traffic controllers had to ground thousands of flights. The planet was slowly coming to a standstill, not because of war but because of fear. Citizens started demanding explanations. Street protests grew larger, but they weren't angry at any one nation this time. They were angry at the idea that no one was telling the truth. Governments issued cautious statements, each claiming innocence. But the public had heard that before. They wanted unity, not excuses. In Geneva, that quiet group of scientists who had been studying the orbital data met again. They sat around a circular table, surrounded by digital screens full of graphs and coordinates. They were exhausted but determined. One of them tapped a monitor and said, "Look at this pattern. The destruction points aren't random. They form a grid around Earth's atmosphere. Someone or something is watching." The others leaned in. It wasn't the kind of watching that comforted anyone. They spent hours tracing the path of each lost satellite, matching it against old military records and space debris maps. The results didn't match any known weapon or natural phenomenon. Whatever caused it, it was new and precise. Later that night, one of the scientists spoke softly. "We need to warn the world. If we keep acting like separate countries, we'll lose everything." So they prepared a confidential report and sent it to the United Nations with one request. Call an emergency session, not for politics, but for survival. 2 days later, representatives from every major nation arrived at the UN headquarters. Cameras captured their arrival, but this time the atmosphere was different. There were no smiles, no scripted greetings. Everyone looked tense. Inside the main chamber, the Secretary General stood at the podium. His voice was calm but heavy with urgency. "Humanity," he said, "is facing a threat we don't yet understand. We can no longer act as competitors. We must act as one planet." His speech was broadcast live. Around the world, people stopped what they were doing to listen. Even those who had lost faith in leadership felt a flicker of hope hearing the word humanity spoken again. But then, before the meeting could end, the power in the entire building went out. For a few seconds, everything went dark. No lights, no microphones, no translation systems, nothing but silence. When backup generators turned on, the main display screen showed static, then a black image with a single line of text written across it. "Stop your games, or face consequences." It lasted only a few seconds before the image vanished. Security teams rushed in, but the message had already been seen by every representative in the room. No one knew where it came from. Some claimed it was a cyber attack from an opposing nation. Others whispered it could be something beyond human control. But whatever it was, it broke the last thread of pretense. From that moment, the discussion changed. The world was no longer debating who started it. The new question was, how do we stop it before everything collapses? In the following days, tensions reached an invisible peak. Strange signals were detected from space, unfamiliar frequencies that didn't match any known satellite or radio transmission. Every major observatory around the world reported seeing unidentified objects in low orbit. Still, no one confirmed what they were. Meanwhile, the United Nations formed a special communication team. Their goal was simple: to send a single, united message on behalf of Earth. It would be the first broadcast that wasn't from one government or military group. It would come from humanity itself. The team worked for days to write the message. Every word mattered. It had to sound calm but strong, peaceful but firm. They decided to begin with a reminder that Earth had always sought peace, even when divided. And then they would say the words that had become the unspoken truth of the age. Stop attacking, or we stop pretending to be courteous. When the message was finalized, it was translated into every major language and encoded for every transmission frequency. Radio, television, internet, even deep space channels used for research. The moment came on a quiet Sunday morning. Across the planet, screens flickered. Radios interrupted music stations, and even personal devices displayed the same global alert. People paused wherever they were, homes, parks, buses, hospitals, and looked up. A clear voice echoed, speaking slowly and without emotion. "This is Earth. To whoever is responsible for these attacks, you are warned. Stop attacking, or humanity will stop pretending to be courteous." We have no wish for conflict, but we will not remain silent, the message repeated once, then the screens went black. For a long moment, the world was still. People stood frozen, realizing that for the first time in history, every human being had just heard the same words at the same time. It was as if the planet itself had finally spoken. In that silence, something changed. Social media exploded with messages of unity and fear. Some called it the greatest moment of human courage. Others feared it would trigger something worse. But no one could deny that the message had reached every corner of the earth and perhaps beyond. Hours passed. No response came. Governments monitored space for any sign of reaction. Scientists rechecked signals, but the skies remained eerily calm. Even the strange frequencies disappeared. It was as if whoever or whatever was behind the attacks had gone silent too. At first, relief spread. People thought the warning had worked. The markets reopened, transport slowly resumed, and schools welcomed children back. But deep inside command centers, analysts noticed something unusual. The silence wasn't normal, it was too complete. It was as if something had stopped watching, or started hiding. In the days that followed, rumors started spreading again. Fishermen reported seeing glowing shapes in the ocean at night. Pilots said their instruments glitched when flying over certain regions. Satellite data showed small heat signatures moving across high altitudes, vanishing without trace. Most of the world dismissed these reports as imagination, but the people in charge knew better. At the United Nations, the same scientist who had pushed for global unity stared at the signal reports on a screen. He whispered to a colleague, "They're still here. They're just waiting." Meanwhile, humanity carried on, pretending everything was fine. News anchors talked about temporary calm and a return to normal life. But ordinary people could feel it. The world's heartbeat had changed. Parents noticed their children asking strange questions. Why did Earth have to send that message? Who were we talking to? Are they going to answer? No one knew what to say. Adults tried to sound confident, but deep down they were just as unsure. As weeks passed, governments began strengthening defense systems. Underground bunkers that had been sealed for decades were reopened. Military units trained quietly under the name Operation Safeguard. Still, leaders insisted it was just precaution. They didn't want panic. But inside those control rooms, they prepared for possibilities the public could not imagine. One evening, as the sun set over the Pacific, an observatory in South America recorded something no one could explain. A sequence of bright pulses coming from deep space, each separated by exactly 1 minute. The pattern repeated 3 times, then stopped. Experts decoded the pulses and realized they were a mathematical sequence, a kind of structured response. Not random, not natural. It was, unmistakably, a reply. The world didn't know yet, but humanity's message had been received. Somewhere beyond the edge of known space, something or someone was listening. And though Earth's people tried to continue their ordinary lives, the silence that followed felt heavier than before. The warning had been sent. Now the waiting began. For a few days after the global broadcast, the planet was quiet, too quiet. People wanted to believe that the warning had worked. News anchors spoke in calm voices again, telling everyone that things were stabilizing. Air travel resumed, stock markets recovered slightly, and the world tried to slip back into its routines. But deep down, nobody truly relaxed. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful, it was heavy. It felt like standing in a dark room, knowing someone else was there but not being able to see them. Then came the first signal. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon at a small observatory in South America. A group of technicians was monitoring radio frequencies when their equipment picked up a strange, rhythmic pulse. It wasn't natural. No storm, no satellite interference, no ordinary noise. It was too clean, too intentional. The pulses came in groups of 3, each spaced exactly 1 minute apart. The same pattern repeated 3 times, then stopped completely. At first, they thought it might be a test signal from another country. But after checking every known transmission source, they found nothing. The signal had come from deep space, beyond the range of any human-made device. The discovery spread quickly. Within hours, scientists in other observatories confirmed receiving the same pulse, perfectly synchronized across continents. It wasn't a coincidence. Someone or something had answered Earth's message. Governments ordered the data to be classified immediately, but it was too late. A short video clip of the signal's waveform had already leaked online. People began to share it everywhere, calling it the reply. Social media exploded with theories. Some said it was proof that another civilization had heard humanity's warning. Others believed it was a trick, a psychological operation from one of the superpowers. But no one could explain how the signal reached every corner of the planet at the exact same time. In living rooms, families gathered around their screens again. The same unease that had filled the world weeks ago returned, heavier this time. For the next 2 nights, the world watched the skies. News channels showed live feeds of observatories, telescopes, and radar systems. Everyone was waiting for something, another message, another sign. And then on the 3rd night, something happened. In several countries, satellites detected fast-moving objects entering Earth's orbit. They weren't meteors and they weren't space debris. Their paths were too precise, their movements too controlled. They seemed to appear out of nowhere, change direction smoothly, and then disappear again. Military radar systems around the world picked them up at the same moment. For a few seconds, they hovered near the upper atmosphere, then vanished. Panic spread faster than official reports. Governments told the public not to worry, calling it a natural celestial event, but no one believed that. Ordinary people had already seen the images. Bright objects streaking across the night sky, stopping mid-air, then shooting off silently into space. Even those who had never believed in anything beyond Earth began to question what was real. Inside command centers, world leaders met again through secure channels. Voices were calm but filled with tension. The same message echoed across all screens. We are not alone anymore. The situation was too complex for anyone to admit publicly, but everyone knew the truth. The world's warning hadn't gone unanswered. Something had heard it. The next few days were filled with confusion. Strange radio interference disrupted communication networks. Civilian satellites started behaving oddly, adjusting their positions without commands. Energy readings from the atmosphere showed brief surges, as if invisible waves were sweeping across the planet. Scientists called them anomalies. Ordinary people called them signs. Meanwhile, fear slowly turned into curiosity. Humans had always wondered if they were alone in the universe, and now it seemed that question had been answered. But curiosity came with danger. In one coastal town, people gathered on the beach every night, staring at the sky, hoping to see something. Some brought cameras, others brought prayers. There was a strange sense of unity among them. Different religions, languages, and faces, all looking up at the same stars. They weren't afraid anymore. They just wanted to understand. Across the ocean, the United Nations Emergency Communication Team began preparing a second message. This one would not be a warning. It would be a statement of peace, a gesture of goodwill. But debates broke out over what to say. Some officials believed showing openness would be wise. Others feared it might be seen as weakness. The world was walking a tightrope between curiosity and caution. While they argued, another event took place. One night, a weather satellite captured a faint image of something massive near the moon. It wasn't a natural formation. It had straight lines, symmetrical structures that didn't belong to rocks or craters. The image was blurry but clear enough to cause alarm. Whatever it was big, far larger than any spacecraft humanity had ever built. The photo was immediately classified, but once again, it leaked. Within hours, millions had seen it online. People around the world started referring to it as the shadow by the moon. News anchors spoke carefully, avoiding panic, but their faces couldn't hide the fear. Something was out there, and it wasn't hiding anymore. Still no harm came, no attacks, no sudden destruction, just observation. The objects in orbit remained silent, as if waiting. For ordinary people, life became a strange mix of normal and surreal. Children went to school. Workers returned to offices, but everyone looked at the sky differently now. The stars didn't feel like distant lights anymore, they felt like eyes. In small communities, people started holding nightly gatherings, lighting candles, and praying for peace, not just for humanity, but for whatever was watching them. There was fear, yes, but also a sense of connection. Maybe for the first time, the entire planet felt like one family. In an underground control room beneath Europe, a group of analysts continued decoding the signal pattern that had started it all. After weeks of studying, they made a discovery that sent chills through everyone in the room. The pulse pattern wasn't random. It was a simple mathematical code, one that repeated every 24 hours. The message was still ongoing. It wasn't just a reply. It was a countdown. The numbers were decreasing, slowly, one by one, toward zero. They didn't know what would happen when it reached the end, but they knew they had to act fast. The scientists immediately sent the data to the United Nations. Another emergency session was called. Leaders from every continent joined the meeting, their faces tense but focused. After hours of debate, the Secretary General finally stood up and said quietly, "If this is communication, we must answer before the last signal ends. We must show we are not enemies." And so they prepared Earth's final message, a transmission to prove that humanity sought peace, not war. It took 2 full days to complete. Scientists, linguists, and communication experts worked together, crafting a universal signal built on mathematics and sound patterns, something any intelligent listener could understand. When the day came to send it, the entire world watched. The launch site was somewhere remote, high in the mountains where the air was clear and equipment strongest. As the team prepared the transmission, the world held its breath once more. The signal went out. It was a simple message. No words, just a sequence of tones and lights, forming a peaceful pattern of harmony. It was meant to show intelligence, calm, and goodwill. The message echoed through space for hours. Then the system went quiet again. Everyone waited. Minutes passed, then hours. Nothing happened. Some began to think it was over, that maybe the message had been lost, or that whoever was listening had no interest in responding. But then, just before sunrise, radar stations across the world detected movement. The objects that had been circling quietly above Earth began to shift position, aligning into a perfect formation. It was too symmetrical to be random, too deliberate to be nature. For a few breathtaking minutes, the lights formed a ring around the planet, thin, faint, and silent. People could see them from every continent, shining like a second constellation. Then, as suddenly as they appeared, they were gone. No destruction, no attack, just a silent acknowledgement. In that moment, people didn't know whether to be terrified or grateful. But one thing was clear: the world had been heard. As dawn broke, the skies looked peaceful again, but the feeling was different. Humanity had crossed a line it could never step back from. The next chapter of Earth's story had begun, not through war, but through a conversation. No one knew what would come next, but deep inside, the world finally understood that the old divisions no longer mattered. It wasn't about nations anymore, it was about being human. And somewhere in the quiet of space, something vast and unseen was watching, waiting for Earth's next move. The morning after the lights vanished from the sky, the world woke up in silence. People stepped out of their homes, looked up, and saw nothing unusual. The stars were gone, the skies calm, the moon as pale as ever. It was as if nothing had happened, but deep down everyone knew the world had changed. The news called it the Night of the Circle. Scientists refused to comment, and officials avoided questions. But the images taken by thousands of phones and cameras told the truth. Something intelligent had formed that ring of lights around the planet. Something that had responded to Earth's message. In cities and villages, people couldn't stop talking about it. Some said it was a sign of peace. Others whispered that it was a warning. Everyone had a theory, but no one had proof. For days, governments tried to calm the public. They said the lights were a natural reflection of solar activity or atmospheric dust, but that didn't explain why they moved with perfect precision, or why every radar on Earth had recorded the same pattern at the same moment. People were scared, but they were also curious. For the first time in history, the entire human race wanted the same answer. Who was out there? And what did they want? In secret, the United Nations kept receiving reports from space monitoring stations. The objects that had surrounded Earth hadn't disappeared completely. They had just moved further away, positioning themselves in a wide orbit beyond the moon. They were still watching. No one dared to attack or send probes. Humanity had made one thing clear in its last message. It didn't want war. And now the only thing left to do was wait. Weeks passed. Life went on, but not as before. The world's priorities shifted. Rival countries stopped threatening each other. Armies that had once faced one another at borders began sharing intelligence instead. Scientists who used to compete for funding now worked side by side, exchanging data and ideas. It was strange. The fear of an unknown presence had done something no leader could: unite the planet. And then, quietly, new discoveries began to surface. Astronomers noticed faint energy patterns near the moon's orbit. They were rhythmic, almost musical, like a coded heartbeat. When analyzed, they formed a repeating pattern that matched one of the signals Earth had sent weeks before. It wasn't an attack. It was communication, but no one could translate it. The message wasn't in words, numbers, or sound. It was in motion, light, and frequency. It was as if whoever sent it was trying to speak in a universal language that humans hadn't yet learned. Inside a research facility hidden deep in the mountains, a group of scientists spent sleepless nights decoding it. They played the light sequence on screens, slowed it down, reversed it, stretched it into sound waves. Then one evening they noticed something unbelievable. When the signal was converted into audio and sped up, it produced a pattern that resembled a human voice, soft, distant, and echoing. It wasn't saying words, but it had a rhythm that felt almost emotional, like someone trying to hum through static. No one could explain it, but everyone in the room felt it. It was the sound of something alive. The recording was played for world leaders in a private meeting. For a long time, no one spoke. Finally, one of them said quietly, "They're answering us in their own way, not through words, but through meaning." The discovery changed everything. Humanity was no longer just waiting, it was now listening. Meanwhile, small but strange events began happening across the planet. Magnetic fields fluctuated unexpectedly, affecting compasses and communication towers. The aurora lights, usually seen only near the poles, appeared in places they never had before: green, pink, and blue waves shimmering across the night sky. Even in tropical regions, people stood outside their homes, watching in awe. The world looked both beautiful and mysterious. Children laughed, thinking it was magic, while adults whispered prayers, unsure whether to feel grateful or afraid. At the same time, something even stranger was noticed. The planet's temperature, which had been rising for years, began to stabilize. Pollution levels dropped faster than any environmental program could explain. Rivers cleared and skies grew brighter. Some called it coincidence. Others believed it was a sign that whoever was watching was also helping. The United Nations decided to hold another global address. This time, the message wouldn't be a warning or a threat. It would be an invitation, a simple message of peace and cooperation. The broadcast took place from a massive hall overlooking the sea. The speech was translated into every language on Earth and transmitted across all frequencies. The Secretary General stood before the world and spoke with calm determination. "To whoever hears us, we are grateful. We come not with fear but with hope. Humanity has always looked to the stars for answers. If you are listening, know that we seek friendship, not conflict. Together, we can protect the worlds we share." It was the first time in history that Earth didn't sound divided. The speech ended with a promise. Humanity would act as one, not as separate nations. After the message was sent, the world waited again. For 3 days, nothing happened. Then slowly, the same ring of lights that had surrounded Earth before began to reappear. But this time, it was different. Instead of forming a circle, the lights aligned into patterns, long lines stretching across the sky like threads of a giant web. They pulsed gently like breathing. Scientists realized the patterns weren't random. They formed coordinates, points in space marking specific locations around the solar system. It was an invitation or perhaps a map, but to where? No one knew for sure, and the debate grew intense. Some said it was a test to see if humanity could work together. Others warned it could be a trap. Still, one thing was clear. The world had been given a choice. Either ignore the sign and retreat into fear, or trust the unknown and take the next step. For the first time, every major nation voted together. The decision was unanimous. Humanity would respond not with weapons but with exploration. A joint mission was planned, combining the best technology and minds from every country. The goal was to send a small unmanned probe toward the coordinates shown by the lights. The project was called Unity-1. When the launch day arrived, billions of people watched from their homes. The rocket stood tall under a silver dawn sky, carrying not just machines but the collective hope of the entire planet. As the engines ignited, a wave of emotion spread across the world. People cried, prayed, and cheered at the same time. It was as if Earth itself was taking a deep breath and stepping into the unknown. The rocket soared higher and higher until it disappeared beyond the clouds. A moment later, the ring of lights in orbit shimmered brighter as if acknowledging the launch. Weeks passed as the probe traveled through space. The world followed its journey day and night. Finally, the moment came. It reached the first coordinate point. What it found there left scientists speechless. Floating silently in the darkness was a massive object. Smooth, metallic, and perfectly symmetrical. It wasn't shaped like any ship humanity had ever designed. It looked almost like a fragment of architecture, a piece of something larger. When the probe sent back its first images, people across the world gasped. It was clear that this object had been built, not formed naturally. And yet it carried no sign of life, no writing, no insignia, just silence. The object emitted a soft pulse of light every few minutes, the same rhythm as the original signal. It was waiting, just like Earth had waited before. As the probe transmitted its final data, one last message appeared on its feed, 3 bright flashes evenly spaced, then a line of faint light pointing back toward Earth, the same pattern that had started it all. The world had reached the edge of something extraordinary, and yet, no one could tell if it was the beginning of friendship or the calm before a new kind of storm. Back on Earth, people gathered again in city squares staring up at the stars. Fear was still there, but now it mixed with wonder. Humanity wasn't just surviving anymore. It was learning, changing, evolving, and somewhere beyond the moon, the silent watchers continued to move, patient, observing, waiting for Earth to take the next step. That night, as the planet turned quietly beneath the stars, one thought filled every heart, spoken and unspoken alike. Maybe the universe had never been empty. Maybe it was just waiting for humanity to be ready to listen. For days after the strange object was discovered in space, the whole planet could think of nothing else. Every news channel, every social media page, and every conversation circled around one question. What now? The discovery had changed everything. It was no longer just a mystery or a rumor. There was real proof of something built by hands not from Earth. In quiet homes and crowded cafes, people watched the images of the strange metallic structure over and over again. Some thought it looked like a monument. Others said it seemed like a gate or a signal tower. But no matter what people believed, one thing was clear. The universe had finally answered. The probe's last transmission had shown 3 bright flashes followed by a line of light pointing toward Earth. A simple pattern, but everyone felt its meaning deep inside. It wasn't random. It was a call. Inside government offices and research centers, meetings went on day and night. The world's leaders, scientists, and engineers gathered together to decide what to do next. They were cautious. One wrong step could mean disaster. But they also knew that this was the most important moment in human history. Some said they should wait, watch longer, and avoid contact. Others argued that ignoring the signal would be seen as fear, or worse, disrespect. After long debate, a decision was made. Earth would respond again. But this time the message would not just be words or warnings. It would be something more. Something that showed humanity's true nature. The plan was simple in idea but complex in work. A second probe would be launched, this one larger and faster. It would carry not just instruments, but symbols of life on Earth, music, images, messages of peace, and even samples of natural sounds, rain, waves, birds, and children laughing. The new mission was named Harmony. It would be humanity's way of saying, we are listening. We come in peace. The world prepared for the launch like it was a global festival. People painted peace symbols on walls. School children drew rockets and stars. And families stayed up late watching documentaries about the mission. For once, there was no war talk, no political rivalry, just one shared feeling. Hope. When the day came, millions gathered to watch the launch. The rocket stood tall under a pale sunrise, surrounded by mist. As the countdown began, there was silence, not the usual noise of cheering, just deep, nervous silence. Then came the ignition. The rocket lifted off the ground, flames bursting beneath it, cutting through the clouds. People held their breath as it disappeared into the blue sky. For a moment, it felt like the whole planet had lifted with it. In just a few days, the Harmony probe reached space and began its journey toward the coordinates given by the alien lights. Its signal could be tracked from every corner of the Earth. Schools, offices, and even hospitals kept small screens on to watch its progress. As it neared the strange metallic structure, everyone waited. The first images started coming in, sharp, clear, and breathtaking. The structure was much larger than anyone had guessed. It stretched like a mountain floating in space, covered in lines that glowed faintly as the probe approached. Those lines looked almost like veins, carrying energy through its surface alive with a faint pulse. Then, as the probe reached a certain distance, something unbelievable happened. The lights on the object began to move, changing color. Soft waves of gold and blue rippled across its surface. The same 3 flashes appeared again, followed by the line of light pointing back at Earth. But this time, something new happened. The line didn't just point, it moved. Slowly, it shifted and curved, drawing a path through the stars. Scientists quickly realized it was a new coordinate. The aliens were giving another location, deeper in space beyond the far side of the moon. It felt like an invitation. The news spread like wildfire. Some cheered, others trembled. Was this the next step of contact? Or a test to see if humanity was truly ready? The world's governments came together once more. There were long discussions, heated arguments, and sleepless nights. Finally, they decided to send a manned mission. Not soldiers, not explorers chasing glory, but a small team of scientists, engineers, and communicators. The mission would be dangerous. The new coordinates were far from safe travel zones, but the volunteers were ready. They said it was worth the risk, because this was bigger than fear. It was about proving that humanity could face the unknown with courage, not aggression. Months of training followed. Every part of the ship was built with the world watching. It carried not just technology, but the hope of every human heart. When the crew was ready, the launch was announced. People around the world stopped their work, their meals, their conversations, and turned their eyes toward the sky. As the rocket rose into space, children clapped, elders prayed, and even the skeptics whispered silent wishes of luck. Humanity had never felt so united. Days turned into weeks. The journey was long, and the world followed every update. The ship's location, the crew's messages, the glimpses of the strange lights that guided them. Finally, they reached the coordinates. And what they saw changed everything. There, floating in the darkness, was something vast. Not a ship, not a planet, but something in between. It shimmered faintly like glass but reflected no light. It looked both real and unreal, like a dream half-formed. As the human ship approached, the same golden blue lights appeared, forming circles around it, not trapping, but welcoming. Then a voice filled the communication system. It wasn't a voice made of words. It was a vibration, deep, calm, and strangely warm. The computers couldn't translate it, but everyone on board understood it somehow. It was saying, "Welcome." The moment the signal reached Earth, billions of people felt a chill. It wasn't fear, it was wonder. Humanity was no longer alone. The ship stayed near the strange structure, sending data and images nonstop. They saw patterns of light that formed what looked like cities, not made of stone or metal, but of pure energy. They saw movements, faint shapes, almost like beings made of light, drifting through the glowing mist. It was life, but not as humans knew it. Then, for the first time, the crew noticed something else. On the surface of the structure, lines of light began to shift and rearrange, forming shapes that looked almost familiar. Earth's outline, the oceans, the continents. The aliens were showing they understood where the visitors came from. They were communicating in the most human way possible, through symbols. One of the scientists whispered softly, "They know us." The world below exploded with emotion. Some cried, some cheered, some just sat in silence, trying to understand the magnitude of what had just happened. It wasn't just discovery anymore, it was connection. In the following hours, more signals were exchanged, not in speech but in color, rhythm, and light. Humanity had finally found a bridge between two worlds. But the communication wasn't just one-sided. The light sent one last sequence before fading, a pattern of rising pulses that, when decoded, showed one clear meaning. Do not fight. Do not destroy. You are seen. It wasn't a threat, it was guidance. A message reminding humanity of the promise they had made. To stop attacking. Stop pretending to be polite while hiding anger and greed. It was Earth's final warning reflected back, as if the universe was reminding humans of their own words. When the crew returned home months later, the world had changed forever. They brought no alien artifacts, no strange metals, just data, recordings, and one unforgettable truth. That peace was not a dream, but a choice. Nations began to act differently. Weapons projects were halted, borders were softened, and research turned toward healing the planet. For once, people realized that if someone out there was watching, someone wise enough to travel among stars, then humanity had to be better than before. And in the quiet of space, beyond the moon's shadow, the light still lingered, watching, waiting, not as enemies, not as saviors, but as witnesses to whether Earth would keep its word. That night, people everywhere stepped out to look at the sky. No one saw ships or lights, and just stars shining brighter than before. But deep in every heart a feeling grew, not fear, not pride, but calm. Because maybe, just maybe, humanity had finally earned its place in the vast waiting universe. Months passed after the crew returned home. The world was still buzzing with awe, but the excitement slowly turned into reflection. People had seen proof of intelligent life beyond Earth, not in imagination, not in stories, but in truth. Humanity was no longer alone in the universe, but with that knowledge came a new kind of responsibility. The message the lights had left behind, "Do not fight, do not destroy, you are seen," echoed in everyone's mind. It wasn't a threat, yet it carried great weight. It was as if someone wiser was reminding humans to take care of their own world before trying to reach others. At first, everyone was hopeful. Nations promised peace. Leaders shook hands. People planted trees, cleaned rivers, and spoke kindly to one another. But as time passed, the old habits began to return. Arguments about power, money, and control started to rise again. Some groups said the whole thing had been a trick, a show made by governments to keep people quiet. Others demanded proof that the beings in space were still watching. The unity that once seemed unbreakable began to weaken. The crew who had gone into space tried to speak to the world, urging everyone to remember what they had seen. They explained that the message wasn't about fear. It was about change. They said that if humanity didn't learn to live together peacefully, it would never be ready to truly connect with others in the stars. But not everyone listened. Soon, there were rumors that some powerful nations had started rebuilding their secret weapons programs. They said it was just in case those beings ever decided to attack. Others believed the best defense was to act strong, not humble. When this news spread, fear returned. People began to look at the skies with suspicion again, not wonder. It felt like humanity had taken one step forward and 2 steps back, and then something happened that changed everything. One quiet evening, observatories around the world detected a sudden pulse of energy from deep space, faint but clear. It wasn't random. The pattern was familiar, 3 flashes followed by a line of light pointing toward Earth, the same signal that had started it all. But this time, it didn't stop there. The light expanded, forming a massive ring that circled the planet just as it had during the night of the circle. The same glowing formation returned, brighter, larger, and pulsing with rhythm like a heartbeat. The skies all around the world lit up, and once again people poured into the streets. Some cried out in fear, others fell silent in awe. No one knew if it was a greeting or a warning. Every major communication system on Earth went offline for several minutes. Then all at once, every screen, every radio, and every satellite channel displayed a single glowing symbol, the same pattern the beings had sent before. It wasn't a message in words, but in meaning. Scientists scrambled to translate it. When they finally did, the translation left everyone speechless. It said only one thing: your choice defines your world. The message was simple, but it hit deep. It meant that humanity's actions, not its words, would decide what happened next. It wasn't about proving strength or intelligence, but about proving wisdom. Governments met again urgently this time. Some wanted to respond with another broadcast, others said silence might be safer. But in the end, the decision was made. There would be no reply. Instead, humanity would show its answer. The world leaders made a public promise. They would stop the secret projects, end the race for dominance, and focus on rebuilding the planet together. The resources once used for weapons would now go toward medicine, education, and protecting nature. It wasn't easy. Decades of distrust couldn't vanish overnight. But for the first time, every major nation agreed to act under one banner. Not as rulers, but as caretakers. Ordinary people became the real heroes. Farmers began sharing their crops with neighboring countries. Teachers started new programs that taught children about kindness and responsibility, not just history and science. Artists painted murals of stars and peace across city walls, reminding everyone of what was at stake. Even in poor villages where people had little to eat, they shared what they had, saying, "We are being watched. Let them see our hearts." Slowly, something beautiful began to happen. The pollution that had once choked cities began to fade as new technology replaced old machines. Rivers cleared and the night skies grew brighter. For the first time in generations, people could see the Milky Way with their own eyes again. The lights in orbit, the ones that had once frightened the world, remained still, silent, and distant. They didn't interfere. They just watched. And as Earth changed, something remarkable happened. The lights began to fade, not disappearing completely, but becoming softer, gentler, like candles glowing from afar. It felt like a quiet acknowledgement, as if the watchers were nodding in approval. Years passed. Humanity had grown wiser. Conflicts didn't vanish completely, but they were smaller, shorter, and handled with care. People learned that strength wasn't about power. It was about compassion. Children grew up hearing stories of the lights, told not as tales of fear, but as lessons of unity. They learned that once, long ago, the human race had come close to losing everything because of its pride, and that a message from the stars had reminded them who they truly were. But there was one more mystery left. In the final years of the watching lights, a faint transmission was picked up by the same observatory that had first received the original signal. It was weak, almost lost in the noise of space, but clear enough to be recorded. When decoded, it wasn't numbers or symbols. It was a soft, rhythmic tone, almost like a heartbeat. The scientists studied it for weeks until one of them realized what it was. The signal matched the exact frequency of Earth's natural magnetic field. It was as if the watchers were saying that Earth itself, the planet, the people, the life, had become part of the same rhythm as the stars. It was the final sign that humanity had passed the test. Soon after, the lights vanished completely. No more rings, no more signals, just the endless beauty of the night sky. Some thought the watchers had moved on to another world that needed guidance. Others believed they had always been there, just invisible, watching quietly to see if humanity would stay true to its promise. And humanity did. Decades later, children still asked their elders, "Did the lights ever come back?" And the answer was always the same. They didn't need to, because by then the world had truly changed. People traveled freely between nations. The idea of mine and yours became less important. Science advanced faster than ever, but it was guided by ethics, not greed. Energy was clean, food was shared, and for the first time in human history, no one had fired a weapon in over 20 years. People learned that peace wasn't given by someone in the stars. It was created by the choices made on the ground. One night on a quiet hill far from the cities, a young student sat under the stars, studying the old records of the Night of the Circle. She had grown up hearing stories about it, but this was the first time she saw the real footage. The glowing ring, the moving lights, and the world standing still in awe. She smiled softly and whispered, "Thank you." Above her, the stars twinkled quietly. No lights, no messages, no movement. But somehow she felt that something, somewhere, had heard her. The world no longer needed to prove itself. Humanity had learned what it meant to be truly courteous. Not the kind of politeness that hides fear or pride, but the kind that comes from genuine respect for all life. And maybe that was what the watchers had wanted to see all along. Because in the end, Earth didn't need to pretend to be courteous anymore. It had finally become what it once only promised to be: wise, humble, and kind. And that was the moment humanity truly joined the universe. Not through war, not through conquest, but through peace. As the final sunrise of that new age rose over the horizon, It painted the sky with gold and silver light, just like the glow that had once circled the earth. Only this time it wasn't a warning. It was a beginning.